This week's tip is about doing a tubular cast on, and it's very similar to a provisional cast on. And one of the things that can be confusing about this is that this technique is often called an invisible cast on, and invisible also implies to provisional. So I call this a tubular cast on so that I know it's different. The reason why I'm doing this is in the pattern that I wrote for a raglan dress for the spring 2015 issue of Cast On, I have the pattern requires a tubular cast on, and so I thought this would be a good choice. Now you can see my yarn down there. I'm using a smooth, different colored yarn. And by the way, there are lots of techniques about how to do this. And if you Google it, you're going to find a whole bunch. And next week I'll do another technique, but there are several ways of doing it. And the two ways that are most often used that you find are the same as for doing a provisional cast on. Now I've put a little knot there so I know which end it is, and when you do your chain stitch, you do half the number of stitches plus 1. So if I want 10 stitches, I would just do 5 plus 1, and that's for the selvage. And that's if you're doing it flat. If you're doing it round, you don't need the plus 1 because you don't have selvages, so you wouldn't worry about that. And in the pattern, actually, it's in the round. Now I'm going to pick up my stitches, and normally you use a smaller needle to do this, but I'm not going to for this particular demonstration so that you can see better. I pick up a stitch in the purl bump, I wrap like a yarn over, I do another one, another stitch, I do a yarn over, and I'm doing this very loose so that we can see this when I'm done. Yarn over, stitch, yarn over, stitch, and I'll do one more, and then we'll have our selvage. And I've got a yarn over and a stitch. Now one of the things I do when I'm doing a crochet hook, I always do more, use crochet chain, I always do far more than I need. What's the harm if you've got extras? It's a pain if you don't have enough. So here's my selvage stitch. So I've got 2 selvage stitches on either side and these yarn overs. Now basically what you do next is you work your selvage stitches, and those are purl stitches because I'm working flat. And then I knit the yarn overs, and then I slip with my yarn in front, purlwise, the purl stitches. Now if I were doing this in the round, we'll see in a second. If you're doing this flat, you always knit the knit stitches, slip the purl stitches, and here's my final stitch. And I would do the same thing on this row. I'm going to work my selvage stitch, and then that's a purl stitch, so I'm going to slip it purlwise. Now, because I'm working flat, this was actually a knit stitch on the other side. And if I'm working in the round, I would then slip the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches, because what I want to do is I want to alternate every other row. And you need to do this slip stitch business at least for 2 rows. The more you slip it, you'll see anywhere from 2 to 4 recommended for these guys. And the more you do it, the more tubular or rounded that cast on edge is going to be. And I'll do one more, and because it doesn't really matter. 2, 3. So I'm knitting the knit stitches, and you can see that those are the stitches that I slipped on the last row. So again, if you're doing it in the round, I would have joined in the round, and then I would have, on the second round, I would have slipped the knit stitches and worked the purl stitches. Okay, so there we go. I'm all done, and now I do my regular row. And this is also a cast on that you frequently see if you're doing double knitting. Do this kind of cast on. And next week I'll show a different technique. that's sometimes called the Italian method. All right, now I'm done, and I want to undo this, and I'm going to find the end that I knotted. And you may want to review the videos I did for provisional cast-ons, because it's kind of similar, except that this yarn tends to split a bit with my knot there. Hold on. Oh, we'll just make this easy. So much for that nonsense. Just cut it out. And you can see this is like a flour sack. I'm just pulling on this and it goes away. And then I can pull it out. And I've got this little guy down here. Again, you can just cut that puppy out. And there you go. Now you can see why you might want to use a smaller needle. This is a very loose cast on. And I used it around the neck of that dress because I wanted it to be loose. And you can see that it has a tubular or a rounded effect on the bottom.